Welcome to Camp Constitution Radio with your host, Hal Shurtleff. This show is heard on WBCQ The Planet every Monday night, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's broadcast out of Monticello, Maine, shortwave, and it's also heard on ITMNation.com on every Saturday afternoon, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This entity is broadcast out of Concord, New Hampshire, an online internet, 24-hour internet entity. And I'm expecting to get a call any minute here from Dr. Kishore, who has a guest on the show before. But if he's not able to make it, we'll just discuss a little bit about the good doctor. The doctor had been on our show back, I think, in February of 2015. And I got to meet him. He came to a couple of video showings of Imagine America, Imagine a World Without Her, that was produced by Denise D'Souza, and we came to a few meetings of a few of the public showings, and I got a chance to. He told me he had an interesting story to tell, and we had lunch together back in February, I think, or late January of 2015. And he told me a story. He told me that he had came to the United States from India in the early 70s. Got involved with as a doctor and got involved with the addiction side of medicine. He worked at a hospital in the Jamaica Plains section of Boston, which actually was founded by George and Martha Washington and Benjamin Rush. This particular hospital, there was several in the country. It started out back in the 1780s. Their goal was to treat alcoholics, the soldiers of the Revolutionary War who were alcoholics, and they were able to treat these folks with some success, and the hospital no longer exists, but at the time it was the oldest hospital in the country, and that's where he became a specialist. And there aren't any doctors who are considered addictologists or what have you, but he was the one that sort of got involved in that discipline and had to learn many different aspects of medicine, including pharmacology and psychology and even legal and nutrition and so forth. And time went on, he ended up starting a number of clinics around Massachusetts that had a good success rate. And in 2011, the medical mafia didn't like the fact that he was doing it on 10 cents on the dollar and was sort of cutting into their territory, and had the power of the state go after him and ended up charging him with numerous felonies, and he had a plea bargain. You figure if he was found guilty on just a few of these felonies, he would have, at his age, at 66, 67, it would have been virtually a life sentence. But he's back out, and we're very glad that his influence is needed more than ever, because all of the drug overdoses, not just in the greater Boston area, but really all over the country. This is probably for a number of reasons, but his influence is important. So we hope to have him on the show at some other point down the road. And you can read about him in the Chalcedon Report. The Chalcedon Report is a publication of the Chalcedon Foundation, and they're based out of California. And he is this writer whom I got a chance to meet just a few days ago. You can actually go online, Chalcedon Online. Let's see if I can boot it up here. Chalcedon Foundation, and you can get numerous articles written about Dr. Kishore. In fact, there's a possibility of a book about Dr. Kishore's experience. Well, just back to some other issues that were of concern. Just a few days ago, I had the pleasure and the privilege of speaking to an Oath Keepers group on the subject of the militia. It was sort of a history of the militia, and it got me a chance to. Usually when you're asked to give a talk on a subject, there are some topics which I can deliver without a whole lot of research. I'm ready to go now, so to speak. This one, I am not an expert, but I've had Edwin Vieira on the show and Dan McGonigal, two people that I would say are experts, including actually very well-versed experts. So I got a chance to do some history research, and it was quite interesting. And again, I learned, not being an expert, but when you're around people who are, you kind of tend to learn a lot. And then you find sort of your own sources of information. And as I reported a couple of weeks ago, I learned that the famous Patrick Henry speech was as a result of the governor of Virginia, the royal governor, Dunmore, ended up abolishing the militia. And the famous speech he gave was at a Virginia convention. Also in attendance at that convention were Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. And his resolution was to reinstate the militia, which was carried after some discussion. And his great speech, "Give me liberty, give me death." He also learned about the involvement in the militia units throughout our history, and how they were redefined. I would say under the color of law, it was something that should never have been allowed to happen, but the American people just had too much trust in their government leaders. I also learned about an entity called the Sea Fencibles, and these were the Naval Militia. Now, I have a dear friend of mine who since passed away, had a piece of property in Rockport, Massachusetts, which is right on the coast, just north of Boston, beautiful little seaport town. And his piece of property was right on top, pretty much overlooking the harbor. And he had a display. He actually created these little characters, Sea Fencibles, about a dozen or so on his property, and made it carved out of wood. And I didn't know a whole lot about it, but these were the Naval Militia. That there were other groups of Sea Fencibles. They were set up to protect the coast from the British ships that, while it may not have been invading, but they would come and they would harass the towns. They would fire the cannons. They sometimes would ask for money, some tribute. They may have a landing party and take some people out, what have you. So also, after I did my presentation, it was not a tea party, I'm sorry, but an Oath Keepers group. I read an interesting article in the New American Magazine. I should say reread the article, and it concerned the Mexican-American War and setting the record straight. And one of the reasons why the Texans revolted against the Mexican government and the dictator Santa Anna is because they weren't allowed to have a militia. In fact, that's one of the many chapters of our history that most Americans are unaware. They're led to believe that we somehow stole all that land and what we did was so horribly unjust. But actually, the Mexican government had asked American settlers, U.S. citizens, to come into Texas. Plenty of farmland, good cultivation, and they'd have some freedoms. And but they started settling because Sam Austin and Stephen Austin. His roots are actually from Connecticut, but his father, Moses Austin, came in and they settled there. And by the 1840s, there was a good-sized population, and there was still some Mexicans there. But one of the reasons why the Mexican government wanted to come in is because they wanted it. The Comanches were using Texas as a base of operations against the Mexicans, and they thought that having Americans there would be a good stabilizing influence. And when they decided when Santa Anna, the dictator of Mexico, came to power, he kind of reneged on the promises and did some things that were quite unconstitutional, lying about different things and restricting their freedoms. So the people of Texas decided to revolt and start an army, create an army. One of the reasons why they revolted is because, again, I mentioned earlier, they didn't have a militia. And there was also Mexicans that were part of Texas that completely supported the drive for independence. That's something you don't hear. And the battle of the famous Alamo, and then the Battle of San Jacinto, when Texas became an independent state. And it was so many years later that it became part of the United States. Now, there was initial reluctance in having Mexico, having Texas become a state for one thing, it would have upset the balance of power of the slave state versus free state. Texas did come in eventually as a slave state. But also that the United States was not very strong militarily and was very concerned about a war with Mexico. And the Mexicans were claiming that they were going to invade the United States and raise the Mexican flag over Washington, D.C. That probably may not have been possible at that time, but they would have had some damage. It would have had some successes and what have you. And an army was brought down, and our army at that time, by the time the war was declared, was pitiful. It was about 5,000 soldiers. But we did have a good officer corps. And the United States did declare war, but was totally unprepared for it. They brought some soldiers down into Texas, and there was a border dispute. It was actually the Mexicans that crossed the border into Texas, and that's what created the war. At the end of the war, we had conquered Mexico. We had our soldiers in Mexico City. Most conquering nations keep that territory. We could have kept Mexico. We could have made it part of the United States and just, if we wanted to. But that's not what happened. There was a treaty, and the treaty declared that the border between Texas and Mexico, the Rio Grande, some land was ceded, and $15 million was given to Mexico. Not only that, but all the people living in this territory that was once claimed by Mexico. You can actually say Spain has as much rights on it too. Mexico had got its independence from Spain in 1820 or so. So and Mexico had no way to govern this land. They had no administration, and it was totally ungovernable. In California, for example, there was Russian settlements. There was English threatening to settle into California. There was still, up in the northwest part of the country. So it was the best thing that ever happened in that area. It would be administered. Even the Mexican governor of California at the time wanted the United States to take over. And most people don't know this. They think somehow that this land was stolen, and a group called La Raza wants to reclaim this land, the Southwest, Arizona and Utah, New Mexico, what have you, California, for Mexico. If Mexico had this land, you would know for sure that it'd be a third world stinkhole, like everything that corrupt country has, an unlivable stinkhole. Instead, you have some of the most productive farmland in the world, and the technology and the standard of living. You could imagine the disaster it would be if the United States never got this part of the country. They got this territory as part of their country. So, anyway, it's a good history, and again, it's history that most Americans are not aware. It's regrettable, but it's one of the things we like to do at Camp Constitution is kind of discuss these things as part of history that people forget, or people don't even know. We can speak a little bit about the camp. What I like to do for people who are interested in the camp program, go to the website. We have a YouTube channel, and the YouTube channel has some of the classes that we've uploaded. We've actually had the camp since 2009, and I think the first year we had a fellow come from a cable station, and he videotaped it, and somehow the video didn't come out right, so we didn't have any footage from the first year. A lot of pictures, but no footage. But every year since then, 2010 up till this year, we've been able to upload some of the classes up on YouTube. Some of the great instructors over the years, as well as some of the recreational activity. Let's say Chris Ann Hall, who's been there for the last 2 years, 2014, and this year, 2015. She does a lot with Americans' founding fathers and founding mothers. She is a big fan of Mercy Otis Warren, I should say, who wrote a 2-volume book on the history. And what's fascinating about Mercy, and I'm actually as motivated to read her books. I'm almost finished, it's 2-volume book. I'm almost finished with volume number 1. Is that this lady was writing by people who had firsthand experience. She knew a lot of the folks, the principal agents, firsthand, especially John Adams. The name of the book is History of the Rise, Progress, and Termination of the American Revolution, and it's edited by Lester Cohen, Liberty Fund is the volume that I have, and I got it on Amazon for pretty short money. So it's definitely, if you really like a good history of our nation, I would highly recommend this book. One of the books that we published recently was a book by Bettina Dobbs. It's called Gems from the Gem Years. Are You Missing in Action? And Bettina was the founder, along with Charlotte Isabet, of this group in Maine, Guardians of Education in Maine. It was founded in the late 70s. And this was when many people still didn't quite understand what was happening in public schools. The homeschool movement was already underway, but it wasn't considered mainstream. And this organization was warning parents about the filth, the pornography that's being promoted in schools, the socialism, the evolution, homosexuality, and others. And then this was back in the late 70s. And this organization had a newsletter, a monthly newsletter, and as a result, the organization does not exist today, but thanks to their influence, many other people were motivated to form other groups, watchdog groups, and today Maine has several Stop Common Core type groups, a couple of homeschool groups, but a lot of these people who were involved in these groups today can trace their roots to this Guardians of Education in Maine. So the author is Bettina Dobbs. She's in her early 90s, 92, 93 now, and I've known her since the early 90s. And she told me about this book, which is project, and I said, I would be very interested. We'd be interested in publishing it. So it's available on campconstitution.net's bookstore, and it's some interesting information. And you don't have to be from Maine to appreciate it. You can just look, gee, my goodness, this stuff was going on back then. A lot of the folks fighting Common Core think that, they're just latch onto something. It's something new, but actually, it's been this problem's been going on for a long time. We also reprinted two things, two important documents, I could say. One of them is called State Department Document 7277, and this was something that was issued by the State Department back in 1961 that called for a standing world army. It called for the elimination of all offensive weapons, and it said that by stage three of this, their goal, that the American people would not only be disarmed, but the only folks who would have weapons would be police, a national police force, and all other weapons would be destroyed or converted to peaceful purposes. And it's interesting that many of the gun rights groups, the Second Amendment type groups, are unaware of this document. You can find versions of this online, but it's nice to be able to have a hard copy. So you can go right onto our website and order a copy. It's only a few dollars. And if you like larger quantities, in fact, anything that you see in the bookstore, I wouldn't mind having 100 copies or 200 copies or what have you. Just feel free to give me a call, and we'll give you, of course, our pretty much a wholesale or just a little bit of a wholesale plus shipping. You can call me at 857-498-1309. I live in Boston. Again, 857-498-1309. Camp Constitution also has a Facebook page. It's called Camp Constitution, and if you're on Facebook and like to visit the page, we do post copies of this show. This show is actually, it's heard on the radio, it's heard on the online, and we also put it up on YouTube, usually within a few weeks of the broadcast. We broadcast again every Monday, 7:30 p.m. on WBCQ The Planet. There was another document that we published about the same time as 7277 is called A Communist Plot Against the Free World Police, an expose of crowd handling methods. And this was a testimony, and it goes back into 1961 as well. It was a hearing before the subcommittee to investigate the administration of the Internal Security Act and other internal security laws of the Committee on the Judiciary, United States Senate. You got all that? And you could probably find this on, actually you couldn't. I think I was trying to find a copy of this online. It wasn't available. It's acknowledged that it exists. You may be able to get a copy of this it is listed on Amazon for another printer, but another publication. But it was a man who had been involved with the CIA, Mr. Kirkpatrick, testified they had found a communist agent in Europe, Western Europe, was caught, and they had all these documents. Their goal was to infiltrate the police departments of the free world. Of course, back then there were probably more countries that were considered free than there are today, and they would pretty much destroy their local police. And so, it also talks about crowd handling and how they manipulate crowds. One of the things the left likes to do is get people in the street, and then once they're in the street, then they can manipulate them. There's no such thing as a unorganized demonstration or a spontaneous riot. Usually, I should say always, people can get upset about something, but it takes somebody or some groups of people to create havoc that results in violence. And we see this recently with the Ferguson, Missouri, a year ago or so, and then Baltimore, Maryland. And you get people like Al Sharpton. I hate to use the word reverend because there's nothing reverential about him, but Al Sharpton demanding a takeover by the Justice Department of local police. Can you imagine the Obama administration, in fact, any administration, their Justice Department, it should be called the Department of Injustice, taking over local police departments? Even the most corrupt local police department would be a far cry better than anything that the federal government would have in mind. And some of these police departments are willingly allowing the federal government, to take over or give them guidelines. I think it was Birmingham, Alabama. There were 6 or 7 cities around the country, Minneapolis. And you notice that most of these cities, the Stockton, California, are pretty much, their mayors and their officials are pretty much far leftists, and they're more than happy. They just love the idea of big government. Come in and take us over. We love what you do. We love tyranny. We hate limited government freedom. Boston is not on that, and I don't think there are any New England towns and cities that are directly involved with that recent Obama proposal, or Obama takeover of the local police. But many police in New England and around the country get federal money for their equipment. They give them vests, and they give them automatic weapons, and they'll give them nice little sort of these militarized vehicles, these half-track type vehicles, etc. And with that comes, there's an expression, strings attached, but I say there's chains attached, not just strings. So, and again, it is a concerted effort to destroy the local police. So these two publications, I think, are very important. Back a couple of years ago, we published something called America's Dynamic Duo, Morality and Freedom, and Camp Constitution's Dynamic Duo, Garrett Lear and Reverend Stephen Kraft. These are 2 of our longtime instructors. Garrett Lear has been involved since the first camp we've had, and Reverend Kraft has been involved in every camp except the first camp. And these are 2 men who are national treasures, and they're their writings Reverend Kraft wrote a book. This is a brief book. It was called America's Dynamic Duo, Morality and Freedom, and then we got some writings from Garrett Lear. And in Reverend Kraft's side of the book, he lists all of the states, little excerpts from all 50, the Constitution of all 50 states, and how they all make reference to God. Let's see if we can read a couple here. Here's the Alaska Preamble. Now, Alaska was the last state to join the Union. We, the people of Alaska, are grateful to God and to those who founded our nation and pioneered this great land. 1956, Arizona Preamble. It became a state in 1911. We, the people of the state of Arizona, are grateful to Almighty God for our liberty to ordain this Constitution. California Preamble, 1879. We, the people of the state of California, grateful to Almighty God for our freedom. Colorado Preamble, 1876. We, the people of Colorado, with profound reverence for the supreme ruler of the universe. Connecticut, 1818. And, by the way, some of these states are older than their constitutions. That's just because they rewrote them. And when we're told by the Article 5 convention people that, these states have had conventions and they've never had anything go along or have any runaways. Well, yeah, they've rewritten their constitutions. Connecticut Preamble 1818, the people of Connecticut acknowledging with grateful gratitude the good province of God and permitting them to enjoy, etc., etc. Delaware 1895, through divine goodness, all men have by nature the rights of worshiping and serving their Creator according to the dictates of their conscience. Notice it doesn't say evolver, it says Creator. Florida Preamble 1885, we the people of the state of Florida, grateful to Almighty God for our constitutional liberty, establish His Constitution. By the way, the southern states, many of them had to rewrite their constitutions before they could come back into the Union. Here's Hawaii, that was the last state that joined the Union in 1959. We, the people of Hawaii, grateful for the divine guidance, establish His Constitution. Even Massachusetts, yes, liberal Massachusetts, their Constitution is one of the most Christian-type documents you'll see. And this is the oldest Constitution in the world that's still in force, although it's been amended a whole lot. We, the people of Massachusetts, acknowledging with grateful hearts the goodness of the great legislator of the universe in the course of His province and opportunity, and devoutly imploring His direction. So this book is also available on Camp Constitution's bookstore. Now we just got a few minutes, about 4 or 5 minutes left, and I just want to talk a little bit about the war on Christmas. Yes, folks, there is a war on Christmas. The very idea that many businesses, especially retail outlets, have told their employees that you can't say Merry Christmas, you got to say Happy Holidays, what have you. That's an example. Now, here are these shoppers going into debt, maxing out their credit cards to buy Christmas presents. They're not spending money for Ramadan. And by the way, I have no trouble with Happy Hanukkah as well. The Jewish population is pretty small, so it's a good chance when you see someone across the street walking in front of you, say Merry Christmas. Good chance that person is probably not Jewish or a Muslim. So, but even if they were, if someone said to me Happy Hanukkah, thinking I may be Jewish, I would say, well, I don't celebrate it, but Happy Hanukkah to you too. That's called tolerance. That's real tolerance. And the left, the enemies of our country, are calling us intolerant, but they hate the idea of Christianity. They hate the idea of Christian displays. Although I've been traveling around the region here in the last few weeks, and it's still very good to see that there are some manger scenes, creches. I was driving through actually 3 towns in a row: Norwood, Massachusetts, Norwood, Walpole, and there was a third town, Rentham. And all these towns had public displays of the manger scene. And I was in Bainbridge, New York, which is on the way to Binghamton off of Route 88. They've had the manger scene right on public property for years. And when you see these public displays, you don't see any fascist dictatorship in these towns. People are happy. They're free to go as they please. Free to worship, but not to worship. Where else? Natick, Massachusetts. That's a little bit west of Boston. Has a major. There's even one in downtown Boston. So of all places. So it's not a question of separation of church and state. Simply having a manger scene doesn't mean that it's forcing the Christian religion or any religion on anybody. But there are a lot of people that really aren't comfortable with this, and it's tragic. So, but I want to wish all of the listeners of this show a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you for listening. And hopefully we'll be back next week with a good interview with Dr. Shore. God bless you. And this is Hal Shurtleff of Camp Constitution Radio, WBCQ The Planet, and IPMNation.com.